may revise numbers into our budget planning for the 25-26 school year. So kind of a review of the second interim. And if you've been to a previous session, this will be a little bit of a review for you, but it'll give you some context as well. Here you see a multi-year outlook. This is how we have to do a budget that lasts for 3 years, and we have to be solvent for all 3 of the years. And you'll see at the far right, we've added 27, 28, because 24, 25 will drop off in June, and we'll have a new 3-year span. But if you look at 24, 25, where it says second interim, you'll see we started the year with about $45 million. We will have a deficit this year of about 19 million, just north of 19 million. And we will actually transfer some money in from other accounts, a little over 3 million. And we'll get into the details of that in a bit. And we expect our ending balance to be $29 million. Now, of that $29 million at the end of this year, about $22 million of it is expected to be restricted. This was a second interim. We're seeing some changes as we close the books. We are always required to have a 3% reserve each year. That's what makes us a positive budget certification. So you'll see the just shy of $5 million. That's 3% of our total expenditures, which this year is about $160+ million. And then that's unrestricted. And the restricted above at 22 million. Unrestricted is the economic uncertainties, and anything above those are on the bottom line. They're unassigned. They're also unrestricted, about 1.5 million. As we come to the close this year, we're seeing some better looking numbers there, balancing out the restricted and unrestricted, and I'll talk to that in a bit. But you'll see as we planned for 25-26 and 26-27, the deficits continued. The reserves and the ending fund balance are still substantial, just falling below 20 million, but most of them are restricted, and the only thing that's unrestricted are our economic uncertainties. So here we have kind of our estimated actuals. As we close the year, we prepare the budget for next year, and we also do estimated actuals. How are we coming as the year closes, and how are the numbers looking? One of the things you've heard me say in previous presentations is our goal is to use restricted resources as much as possible. And we're finding we're spending those down faster than we thought in March, so that's good. Because what that does is it uses funds that are restricted and frees up funds that are unrestricted. They're not ongoing monies, but it helps the bottom line and the cash flow. So the unrestricted reserves improve if we use more of the restricted reserves. The other thing we do when we start closing the books, they won't be officially closed until September, is we look at our actuals, what we spent versus what we encumbered. For example, at the beginning of the year, we'll set up a large PO for Pacific Gas and Electric to pay all of our utility bills. And as the year comes to a close, we look and see, was that PO that we set up, usually it's based on the previous year, accurate? Did we have a lot of heat that caused us to use more air conditioning and we had to add to the PO and it went higher than expected, or vice versa, was it lower? Typically, we tend to finish ahead of budget, but not substantially. It sounds like a nice number, $500,000 to $1 million usually, that we come back with the encumbrances that don't get used, but that's less than 1% of our budget. So they're pretty accurate. Some are higher, some are lower. We usually end up on the positive side. So that also will probably help our bottom line. We're just finalizing that as we get ready to bring the budget to the board for the June 12th meeting and the hearing on LCAP and the budget. The other thing we'll be looking at, and you'll hear me talk about this all the time, is enrollment and ADA. ADA is average daily attendance. We are not funded by the number of people who sign up to go to our school. We're funded by the number of people who attend each day. And just because of the demographics, we're having a decline in enrollment. That's been going on for years. It's going on all across California for the most part. There are very few counties that are not. But on the upside, we've seen our ADA rate improving. I mean, we're not back to where we were pre-pandemic. At that point, we ran about 96% attendance rate. That means students were here 96 days out of 100, right? This year, we budgeted 93.8. We did a little bit of growth up to 94%, so it's a little improvement, but not up to the 96. If we grow this, that will also grow our revenues, but more importantly, it grows time in class for students and generally creates better educational results. And I know several families have tapped into the short-term independent studies and things like that. And when you do that, you get your educational support, but you also don't count as absent. You get credit for being in school if you're traveling and you set that up with your school. So let's talk about the May revise. What did the governor have to share back on May 14th when he presented his updated budget? The budget in January was built in December. So there was a lot of changes between December and May. One of those would have been the fires in Los Angeles County. That had a big impact. And the other is just a lot of economic turmoil in the stock market, which generates a lot of income taxes for the state of California. So that has a big play. So the biggest thing that was substantial change is what was proposed for next year's Prop 98. Prop 98 is educational dollars. That's the money that gets sent for schools in California. And in January, the bar on the left, the governor had proposed just shy of $119 billion for the 25-26 Prop 98 budget. Pretty close to what was budgeted for 24-25. But because of the turmoil and the concern about returns from capital gains in the stock market, his May revise lowered that Prop 98 by $4.4 billion. The Prop 98 is made up of two primary components of revenue. The blue section is what the state provides from their collections of income tax and sales tax. The kind of orange section above is what's provided by local property taxes. And you'll even see that the property taxes have gone down from January to May. Part of that, I suspect, is a lot of property in Los Angeles County that's no longer getting assessed at the time. So that's probably the $500 million decline in property tax revenues, at least the lion's share. So our 25-26 minimum guarantee dropping a couple percent, down $4.4 billion. Now in January, we also look at the 24-25. When the governor does his budget, he's budgeting for 25-26, but he's checking to see what did 24-25 come in at based at what they budgeted when they passed the budget a year ago. And what they budgeted a year ago on the left was just over $115 billion, $115.3 billion. But it was actually a good collections year. The numbers indicate that $119.2 billion was going to be coming in at the governor's proposal in January. But something interesting happened. He suggested that may not come in, so I'm only going to fund it at 117.6. It was a $1.6 billion haircut. And everybody was shocked because that's not the way it's usually done. We don't know how this is going to pan out with the legislature at all. But at this point, there's $1.3 billion less than what the numbers suggest Prop 98 should get funded in what the governor's proposed. Part of the reason it's smaller than January is because now you'll see the collections for 24-25 not quite as robust as we expected, but still pretty robust, a healthy growth. And still the governor is saying, let's not fund it all the way. Let's leave it a little wiggle room in case it comes in short. So we don't know what's going to happen with that, whether the legislature will say, you need to fund it the way it's traditionally been funded. And if they do say that, how will that money be used? Will it be ongoing? Will it be one time? Will there be certain focuses for the spending on that dollars? We don't know. It's not in the governor's budget. The legislature hasn't dealt with it. So we don't have it in our budget at this point either. It's too variable for us to kind of calculate. Another thing he proposed in January was a one-time funds of $1.8 billion. He adjusted that ever so slightly for the May revise to $1.7 billion. Again, it's proposed by the governor. Whether the legislature adopts it, whether they leave it kind of open-ended, or whether they have specific uses for it, we don't know at this time. So it's always challenging for us as we start doing our budget to figure out how to apply those proposals when they're not law. June 12th, we submit our budget to the board. The legislature doesn't have to have their budget done until June 15th. So a lot of ours has some speculation based on what we assume will happen. And then we will do corrections at first interim based on what the language actually ends up being in the state budget. One other area is the Learning Recovery Emergency Block Grant. Not as big as the one time, it's just shy of $400 million, but a sizable chunk of money. Several years back, they pulled $1 billion out of this fund and they're paying it back. So they're giving about a third reimbursement. This is something they have to do. I think it's pretty likely it'll happen, but again, not a guarantee, but another source of dollars, one time, not ongoing. And then this slide kind of breaks down how the funding will be over grade spans. We get funded at different levels depending on the grade span of the student. So TK3, you'll see at the left, they were paid $10,025 per ADA, per average daily attendance, last year. We'll get a 2.3% COLA on that number. That's different than January. It was 2.43% in January, a small decline, not major, but a small decline. And then it'll give us the new number of 10,256. In TK through third, we have class size reduction. So there's what's called a GSA, a grade span allowance, and that helps offset the smaller class sizes of 1,067. So the adjusted rate for a TK3 would be $11,323 per student. That's for any school district. Some school districts have students with higher needs, free and reduced lunch, EL students, foster or homeless. That's what the supplemental grant is and the concentration grant. We actually have a sizable amount, about 50%, who fall into that category. So we get the first line of supplemental, but we don't get the second line of concentration. So that very last line is not part of our budget equation. The other big proposal the governor had was the TK add-on. Legislation requires us to go to a ratio of 10 students per adult in TK. That legislation is scheduled to start next year. It's not conditional on funding or anything. It's just scheduled to be 10 to 1. Class size could be 24, but if you go up that high, you need an additional adult beyond the two. Currently, they do fund the TK add-on at about $3,200 per TK. The governor in January proposed that that would jump up to $6,400. In May, he pulled it back to $5,500. But another wild card, we aren't sure exactly how the legislature will process that, if they will leave the money in there. We haven't heard anything about a change in this statutory requirement of 10 to 1. But that's the way our classes are being built currently. So, all right. So then how does all of that translate for us as we start planning our budget? What do we look at in our own assumptions and trying to take in the pieces from the May revise, and what do we include or not include? All right. So this is the recommendation slide we get. School Services of California is a statewide organization that kind of works very closely with schools and budgets. And the county, the Santa Clara County Office of Education, will pretty much follow these recommendations. They actually only recommend us including the COLA because it's statutory and it will be included. They don't recommend including any of the other funding sources in our budget. In kind of looking at things, we're somewhere in between those two extremes. The Learning Recovery Emergency Block Grant, we're assuming this will be funded. It's very likely it's a payback that the state has to do. So we actually are including that in our budget. It's considered low risk. If you look at the chart, they don't recommend including it, but they consider it pretty likely to go through. The TK add-on, they say not to do. They consider it to be a higher risk. I think if they're going to keep the 10 to 1, that's probably going to go through. We have not assumed $5,500 though. We've made some assumptions of some of the money coming, a little more than $3,200, but not the full $5,500. So we put some in the budget. If it doesn't come through, it won't be too painful, but we didn't put all of it in the budget. And then lastly, the discretionary block grant, that's just too unknown, so we haven't included any of that in the budget at this point in time. So, And then that $1.3 million the governor is saying, let's not fund that, that's nowhere to be found either, because it's not in anybody's budget at this point. It's not even a proposal. What I've done in this slide is take kind of our budget assumptions and updated them from second interim. I've striked out the ones from second interim and put in the current ones. The COLA has been updated. You can see the 2.43 that we had earlier in the year has dropped to 2.3. And unfortunately, the other years have also declined in their COLA allocations. Those aren't fixed. They can still change. But as we budget going forward, the lower COLAs mean we generate less revenues in the out years because we'll be building them off a smaller increase. Our anticipated ADA, a little tick up this year by about 15 students, 16 students, and pretty spot on for 26, 27, and 27, 28. So while it's still declining, it's not declining faster than we anticipated. And we'll actually see. We've had some good TK enrollment. Hopefully that'll continue over the summer. And hopefully we won't have too many people moving out of the area so we can keep the students that we have. And the attendance rate. In the past, we budgeted 93.8%. We're seeing that improve ever so slightly, but it's going in the right direction. So we'll budget 94%. And if we see that trend line continuing, we'll update that in our outlooks in the future. So then you see what the LCFF amount is that we get. The challenge is that the COLA is only on the students, and because our students are going down, we're not getting 2.3% on last year's, we're getting 2.3% per student. So it doesn't end up being a $2 million increase on $100 million. It ends up being less because we have 150 less students on the average than last year. So. And then this is actually a slide I found interesting. We talked about attendance declining everywhere. Santa Clara County, it's kind of hard to read. It gets a little blurry there, but over the next 10 years, they're anticipated about a 12% decline in enrollment. And you'll see most counties are expecting the same. Los Angeles, almost 19%. Placer County outside Sacramento, a lot of growth and building going on there. That's one of the few that are growing. But most of the coastal counties are declining. So it's going to be a continuing challenge that we face with declining enrollment and right-sizing ourselves. So, and some of the issues we face, high cost of housing, smaller families, lower birth rates, just in general, part of that being the cost of raising a family, fewer TK and kinder enrollees than in the past. So what happens is an 8th grade class graduates, there are more people moving on to 9th grade, leaving our district, than there are necessarily coming in to TK and or kindergarten. And then I mentioned attendance several times and trying to get back to 96%. We had some impacts from the immigration policies. That doesn't seem to have been a concern of late, but it's a wild card as well. So kind of going back to this slide and updating where I think we'll be with estimated actuals. All right, I put it in the second interim. Probably the ending balance will be a little higher because I think we'll have some expenses that don't come through or roll forward to next year. More importantly, I think the restricted will probably be down more in the between 20 and 21 million. All right, so we've got some more expenses there. And if we say, let's say 1.5 million less in restricted, that means that drops to the bottom line. So our reserve would stay the same, but that extra 1.5 million that was spent in restricted versus unrestricted would end up on the bottom. So that 1.5 would grow by that another 1.5 and be 3, which puts us in a better position going forward to carry on. All the items in 27, 28 are yet to be determined. So with the new budget, we'll update what these actuals are and how they roll forward into our new budget years. And then this is just kind of the multi-year revenues and expenditures. Again, a slide you've seen before. In 24, 25, we don't really need to transfer much from the special reserve. That $3 million is money from the sale of minor. The majority of that was used for the new math textbook adoption. Some of it was also used for the retirement incentive. So that's what that contribution was, because those dollars were specifically allocated for those one-time uses. That minor sale was approved by the state allocation board. When the glider sale finally closes, we have a similar plan for that. But in next year, you can see in blue, I have the $9.7 million. That's also coming from Fund 40. We have a chunk of change from the sale of Calero several years back. I think it's about $17 million. It'll be around the end of this year. And we'll use a little more than half of it next year. But if the improvements come this year with a higher ending fund balance, we may not have to draw on that as much, which carries us forward to 26, 27. And that number hopefully will be lower a little bit as well and can carry us out to 27, 28. That's the goal. The Calero money in Fund 40 is less restricted. It's actually relatively unrestricted, so we can use it as a placeholder. Most of the other funds in there have obligations to them. And I wanted to talk about the bigger problem is not the savings account or the reserves, but our deficit spending. We need to kind of get our revenues and expenditures in line. You can see that our revenues start to tick off because we lose some one-time dollars. Those may change if we get one-time dollars added back in with the May revise. And the expenditures they tick off as well, but there's still this gap. So we want to kind of shrink that gap so that our reserves last longer and keep us in a positive state for the budget. This is Fund 40 because there are a lot of resources in there, and it's made of a variety of things. A lot of people think of the bond money. I put that on the first line. The bond money is not part of Fund 40, and it's very precise in its being spent on the bond program. So I just want to put that here just as a clarification because people think that is a lot of money, but it can't be used for anything except capital expenditures. The sale of minor, the current balance we expect to be just over $10 million, and that's because there have been some expenses put against it, like the math adoption and early retirements. And then we had an expenditure plan, and that's linked there that the State Allocation Board approved. The legislation on minor and the same for glider was that you could use the money for non-capital, non-building, non-property acquisition, but it had to be a one-time expense, not an ongoing recurring expense. Glider will be the same. It's in red because it's still pending. It's not there yet, but that will be, we currently have just shy of 2 million by the time this calendar year ends, and the sale was just over 26 million. So that also is set up for funding the next English language arts adoption, funding incentives, funding capital expenditures so we don't have to hit the general fund like repairing the solar panels and stuff. Calero, there's a 17 million, a little over 17 million we expect by the end of the year. This has been used a lot, just like I'm using it now as a placeholder. We try not to spend it down because that just reduces our options going forward. So it's a good placeholder. It can pay for things on the short term, but it's can only be used so many times because it doesn't regenerate. Mitigation fees, when people are building a warehouse or something, they oftentimes make a mitigation agreement. There's about $1.5 million there because they're for offsetting impacts for enrollment. They're supposed to be used for capital. And the same, we had a settlement on our solar panels. There's about $1 million there. That's intended to do the repair for any of the solar work. So that's the intent. It's not as formally restricted as the others. Okay. So Fund 40 is kind of keeping us afloat for the years ahead and also keeping things funded for big time purchases so we don't have to worry about coming up with $3 million in the general fund for an English language arts adoption or the next one after that. Ooh, pointing the wrong way. And then some of the things we've been trying to do to close that gap, that deficit gap. Retirement incentives, and just closing the gap of the number of people at the top of the salary schedule, hiring people who are maybe not as far over. That generates savings. That's what justifies the cost of the retirement incentive. Optimizing restricted resources, which we've been doing this year and trying to do that. We'll try to continue to do that in the years ahead. They, again, are a stopgap because they only are there once. Reducing contracted services. We've made a big lift to kind of stop hiring outside contracted services. That should generate savings for us as well. More efficient bus routes. Transportation is another area that costs a good deal of money, and can we be more efficient in how we move students around? Effective supports for special ed students. You know, can we do things to improve behaviors, increase mainstream time? Can we find ways to do things differently that are more effective and maybe more efficient? Improving attendance rates, that's when everybody can jump in and help on, or if you have to go on a family trip or step away, ask for the short-term independent study. That helps reduce the impact of the absence, both, again, academically and financially. And then just try to offset as many costs outside of the general fund. Are there other places we can spend money for big ticket items? Putting things to the bond, putting things to that minor expense or the glider expense so that we don't have to worry about a big adoption or a big repair. And lastly, like using our bonds effectively, making the schools more attractive, more appealing, hopefully drawing people in, making our schools a desirable place, up to date and modern. So a lot of information, but I'll open it up for questions. See if there's anybody who has any questions in the room or, okay. I'll have a sheet of you wouldn't mind reading them. Oh, hands up, okay. So, Don, do you have a question? Did I pronounce it right? Or type it in the chat, maybe? If you type the questions in the chat, it might be easier. We'll read them out loud to everybody. Okay. Any questions in the room? Yes.
And we need to get that number for 96 again, because even an independent study or a Saturday school option, not the same as being in the day of. So it not only helps the kids, obviously with their academics, but also.
Right.
Like, what kind of enforcement?
Yeah, I know this. So let me repeat the question. How are we encouraging, making sure students show up on the day-to-day rather than in our extended recovery methods, right? Because we do have Saturday school, the independent study. But you're right, schools do track attendance and frequent absenteeism. So they'll have SARB, school attendance review boards, and they'll contact parents and all and try to work with them both, you know, sticks and carrots, you know, but hey, we need you to be here. It's a requirement. It's compulsory education, but also what challenges are you facing? Why are you not able to get here? So it's trying to be supportive, but also reinforcing the need to be there, because you're absolutely right. The most efficient way to get educated is to be there every day and get the actual delivered instruction rather than trying to do it on your own or on a Saturday in some different format. So. Right. Right. Yes. Well, and when I was a principal, we had the SARB review, and usually it was a parent meeting and stuff, but there were times where we got involved with the district attorney if it was that serious. So I know we have those options. We don't tend to go there that often, but it is an option for us to, if we really need to kind of enforce, you know, somebody who's really just not responding at all. But it's keeping up on it. And I know at the middle schools, that's a lot of what the assistant principals work on. And then the site secretaries and all do a lot of that with attendance letters and stuff too. So something we can look at, can we increase that and all? Can we do that? And just, again, I don't want to sell attendance as a financial thing, because I think first and foremost, it's an academic thing, but it's a win-win all the way around. Okay. Okay, the fiscal year, our fiscal year parallels the state. It's July 1 to June 30th. So we'll present our budget June 12th. It'll go to public hearing, and then as well as the LCAP, and then on June 26th, the actual second meeting we have to do at a second meeting is actually adopt the budget and the LCAP, and that'll be near the end of June, and we have to do it by June 30th.
Question is, has OGSD pursued zero emission school bus grant funding?
Has OGSD pursued zero emission school bus funding? Yes, we actually have 9 electric school buses, and we're still working on getting our infrastructure installed, but it's close. We're waiting for that transformer from PG&E, but we did take advantage of those grants, and they paid the lion's share of those 9 new buses, and we're using them.
Amazing.
Long ones, you can paraphrase it. There is some California legislation around reducing caseload number caps from 28 to 20 for RSP teachers, and I believe there is a proposed reduction for speech and language pathologists and psychologists. If this is passed, how will that impact our budget?
Yeah, I have heard of it. I haven't heard any of the details. I'm sorry. Yes, there was a question about proposed legislation to reduce the cap for resource specialist teachers who serve special needs students, going from a cap of 28 to a cap of 20, and reducing the cap on speech and language pathologists. I don't know what the numbers are on that change, but I've heard of the legislation. I don't know the specifics of it, and I don't know the implementation timeline. As we all know, special ed is a hard area to hire, so it'll add a big lift to increase that. And speech and language pathologists is even a harder hire. So, so those will be some of the challenges we face. And special ed is an area that the state and the federal government have never stepped up and fully funded, so that impacts our budget indirectly as well. So that could have a financial impact on the district as well. So hopefully with that, they'll allocate funding to reduce those sizes and caseloads, just like they allocate funding to reduce TK3 classrooms.
Next question is, how does this updated budget affect teacher salary and compensation? This is coming from a parent in OGSD who's also a teacher in another school.
Yeah, I think the upcoming budget doesn't have much in ongoing revenues. We only have the COLA that's really ongoing. What would be really ideal is if the 1.3, sorry, okay, how does this upcoming budget impact teacher salaries and benefits? So the upcoming budget that's open for negotiations. The challenge with the 2.3% COLA and the fact that we're reducing, there's not a lot of new ongoing money. So that's the challenge with salaries need to be paid every year going forward. So trying to figure out how to make that work. Where do you find efficiencies to cover that? Because the 2.3% COLA for us with the reduction in ADA will probably generate less than $600,000 a year ongoing funds. So, yeah. So how can mainstreaming be a solution? I think if we can provide students more mainstream environments, sometimes they can access the mainstream curriculum. One, it's an educational goal, and it's a requirement that's becoming more necessary. And hopefully when you have mainstream, and oftentimes when I was teaching, I had a lot of the SDC who were able to be in my math class, join my math class. It was helpful for their being in a mainstream environment and all, and then the aid would come and support them. It may not end up being as big a budget solution. I think it will be a good special ed solution for that student to get those services. And if we can give them the least restrictive environment possible, the least restrictive environment tends to be the also less costly environment. Okay. Any other questions? Right.
Does that mean you're getting as much funding as you thought, or is it slightly more funding, just not as much
No.
as the governor probably should be funding?
Right. So The question is about the 24-25 Prop 98 allocation. So when they passed the budget a year ago, they budgeted about $115 billion. But it's been a good year of collections. There's been some pretty healthy stock market gains and all. So the new estimates, the way they always do the estimates, say that 24-25 should be funded at $119 billion. Okay? It was a little higher in January, but it slid back a little bit. The governor, I think hedging his bets or worried that maybe some funds won't come through in the future, said, let's not fund it the way we normally do. Let's fund it less than. And that way, if the money doesn't come in, we don't have to pull back money or short later on. That was his rationale. Some people refer to it as a maneuver. There was something similar that he proposed last year. So that $1.3 billion, in my eyes, is part of our Prop 98 allocation that's not anywhere in the budget. So if the legislature says, no, we're going to follow our norm and budget up to the $119 billion, then how does that $1.3 billion come to us then? If they do fund it, is it going to be another one time? Or are they going to give it to us as ongoing so that we can count it in the multi-year? If the okay, right. So if the legislature goes with the traditional means that we've always used to allocate Prop 98, it would be funded at $119 billion. So that's higher than what the governor's proposing we fund it as. So it would be at this point $1.3 billion more than the governor's proposed. And you're right. We'll see if it happens and then how it happens. All right. Any other questions? Good. All right. Well, thank you all for joining. If you have questions or whatnot, don't hesitate. Drop me an email. Happy to respond. Or if you want to talk in person, happy to do that as well. So have a good evening. Enjoy the rest of your night and the last handful of days before you start your summer.